Hola, compañeros. It's your old pal, King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. I've obviously been doing quite a bit of Spelljammer content since the box set came out. I'm a longtime fan of the original Spelljammer setting. It was one of my favorite, probably my three favorite settings from the original AD&D. And it's been a long time awaiting for them to finally put it out for 5th edition. You can see my reviews for the things that I find, lacking in this particular box set. I would recommend to anyone who's trying out Spelljammer for the first time that you might want to look into going on to DriveThruRPG and trying to get some print copies of books like the Spacefarer's Handbook, or even like the print version of the entire original Spelljammer box set, because it's full of a bunch of information on, starship combat, and just the general, logistics and hardships that come with, traveling long distances in space on a tiny boat with a limited amount of atmosphere and food and all that kind of stuff. I kind of more want to speak philosophically, though, as to why Spelljammer is actually a really excellent setting, especially for younger dungeon masters. Maybe not as your very first setting, but after you get your feet under you a little bit with running several adventures or running a campaign or two, it's a good one to jump into because it is an exercise in world building unlike any other of Dungeons and Dragons settings. Even more so than Planescape. Planescape has like this infinite scope because it has the interdimensional concept, but because so much of the material is focused on the outer planes and the inner planes to some degree, well, there's a fixed number of those, and they're all fairly well defined. Spelljammer, on the other hand, because its whole thing of traveling between different star systems, and each star system is potentially home to its own game world, means that it has every single setting for Dungeons and Dragons in it, plus everyone's homebrews out there. You can kind of in some way think of her, around some little twinkling star in the distance. And it's such an open sandbox. As soon as player characters get control of a Spelljammer themselves, it's much harder to control or try to herd your players down certain specific paths. And because of that, it forces you to have to improvise and think about world building on a much kind of quicker, on your feet kind of way than spending months, crafting your own little world and coming up with maps and adventure locations and all that kind of stuff. Because of Spelljammer's nature, you might occasionally have to think of that kind of stuff up on the fly. It's not even just like the Earth-sized planets that you have to worry about. Countless moons, large asteroids, all of, like drifting giant ships and statues in space, and even some star systems, the thing that is the sun isn't necessarily a giant ball of flaming gas. Ancient skeletons of solar dragons. There's like so many things that become environments where characters can find adventure upon, that it can be almost overwhelming. They, especially the older versions of Spelljammer, do provide a bunch of like random tables to kind of throw together, a star system or a planet at random, although it's not very detailed. My general thinking, and of course even I myself don't necessarily always follow these rules absolutely, but I feel like a general guideline when it comes to just how to think about how you want to structure any sort of setting upon an individual world or asteroid or whatever is, for one thing, Spelljammer, especially in 5th edition, on most Earth-sized planets, your average standard D&D game world like Forgotten Realms or Eberron or whatever, like 99.999% of the population has no idea that any of this shit's going on up there. The only people who are really going to know are going to be the few like relic races like Illithids who are hiding underground, who might be aware of their past and what's possible. Maybe a few really like high-level powerful archwizards, and like only the most politically connected and powerful of like imperial lords and courtesans and that kind of stuff will have any sort of clue that any of this is going on. People could see a whole fleet of flying ships over their head and they'll just assume it's some act of wizardry, but they're not really gonna have it in their minds of like how high up those ships can go, so to say. The societies that should be more aware the greater size of the Spelljammer universe, and that there's space travel and stuff, are actually going to be from your smaller worlds. Because since they're more resource limited, they're going to be, the smaller they are, the more dependent they're going to be upon the existence of Spelljammer technology for them to be able to stay supplied and the population stay stable and happy and healthy and all that kind of stuff. Your big worlds are the environments that are big enough where you're going to have all the multiple non-human races all jockeying around. You can consider occasionally you might want something to be like the home world. You might find the original elf home world or the original halfling home world or the original gif home world or whatever it is. But moons are actually, I feel like, a better bet if you want to have single race or maybe only one or two races that are on the world in question when the characters go to go visit it, in terms of what kind of political dynamics there are. The smaller surface area, there's less room for the kind of level of interspecies competition that Faerun on Toril can support, kind of a thing. Asteroids are almost going to universally be colonies. They're going to be the most dependent on having outside sources of food and trade in order for them to be able to support any sort of thing. And with all of this being said, the vast majority of locations that are out there should be uninhabited by sentient life entirely. In terms of just having random wilderness crawls, like a lot of places characters might find themselves, landing upon, might be covered with all sorts of strange critters and life forms, and, your excuse to kind of cobble together a little perfect miniaturized ecosystem. You can actually take some thought into like what creature out of the monster manual are you going to use to be like the dominant alpha predator, and like what are your primary prey species, what might be there to lure player characters there. I would recommend trying. There's times when it's appropriate for the setting and all that, but try not to thwart the players too much by like contriving reasons to disable their ship and force them to land on someplace you want them to. If they get their ship wrecked, that should be entirely on them, and they should feel bad and stupid for having done it. They shouldn't feel like it's just some sort of plot device that's going to force them to go on this, tomb mission because you want to like take something from an old adventure module that you want to adapt. That's another thing that makes it that you can do real easily. If you, especially with older D&D materials, back when you'd have more, random adventures that are kind of just set up in a world of their own, but aren't necessarily attached to the, more specific standardized, D&D adventure settings. You can easily take stuff and just, instead of making it a map that's just a small part of a greater world, you can just say that little map is the entire surface of a small-bodied moon, and you would just have to figure out where the terminator point is as to like what side's going to be daylight and what side's going to be night side at any kind of time. But as a time-saving device, especially if your players are not familiar with the book that you're pulling this stuff from, which is also, once again, another advantage for young DMs to look at some of the older materials that are available for print and in PDF, because there's a slight more likelihood, at least for people of your generation, that your players are not going to come in already having spoiled some of the material for themselves because of the ready availability of the 5th edition stuff. Just a few things to keep in mind. Like I said, the smaller the world, the more likely the people living there are very aware and fluent with Spelljammer tech and interstellar trade and all that kind of stuff. Whereas larger planets, where you get up to the Earth type scale, the bulk of the people on those worlds are going to have no idea anything's going on at all. They're just having their own little, whatever internal politics and problems against the evil like Lich Lord or Dragon of Jnalana, or whatever it is that you want. It's an excuse for you to do cameos of game worlds you've played in as a player yourself earlier on, where like I said, everyone's homebrew setting is out there somewhere in the Spelljammer universe. It's not only just the Forgotten Realm space and Orth space and all that kind of stuff. Athos. And especially since 5th edition doesn't give you very much details on other star systems. There's a few mentioned in the Light of Xerxes adventure module, but that's another advantage to actually going out and finding this old gent. It actually does give you a section on like what are the other moons and planets of some of the major setting worlds. You know, your characters in Forgotten Realms get hold of a Spelljammer, you know, like off some Yankee pirates or some stuff, and manage to get up there. Well, what are they going to find? If you're relying purely just on the 5th edition materials, you're not actually going to be giving your players anything resembling a canonical representation of, you know, the Forgotten Realms' space setting. And so, you know, that there's still usefulness to going back and buying these old books, even if you don't need the rules out of them because you prefer the modern book. And who knows, maybe you might actually end up liking some of the more nuances that you can get out of, you know, the older AD&D editions in some ways. Most editions kind of have their own thing. You know, you could take the Nintir Vale setting out of 4th edition D&D's DMG, and boom, you got a moon right there. It's all easy to do. And it's a good writing exercise, because, you know, and every little idea you've had for a campaign rolled, but you've never really quite got it to gel, you know, or you moved on. But if you need something on the fly, you can dig that little nugget out of your brain, and bam, you've finally used this thing you thought of and never got around to using. There's just a weird kind of creative writing utility that Spelljammer brings that's unique for the Dungeon Master, perhaps more so even than the players playing in it. And since we're the goddamn ones who are having to buy and run this shit, I feel like little things like that are actually something to take note of when they're there. And so that's, I guess, my half-ass pitch as to why you, as a younger Dungeon Master, might want to check out Spelljammer Adventures in Space. Until next time, stay waspinated.